morning, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome to the OTL 2020 session on petroleum refining trends and outlook for tomorrow's energy supply. This session focuses on variables driving Africa's refining renaissance and will review guidelines on the requisite capabilities, qualifications, and competence required for cost-effective refining operations in a rapidly changing downstream environment. The moderator for this session is Victor Onyegbado. He has vast experience with commercial transactions, documentation, and litigation, particularly those relating to marine cargo claims, carriage of goods by sea, international trade, and marine insurance. He has advised government institutions, regulators, sea terminal operators, shipping companies, and various cargo interests on issues relating to regulatory policy, infrastructure concession agreements, maritime claims litigation, contracts negotiation, and modalities for doing business in Nigeria. Speakers for this session are Mr. Anibo Kraga, Executive Secretary, African Refiners Association, ARA. Anibo Kraga served as Chief Operating Officer, Refining and Petrochemicals of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation NNPC and NNPC Group General Manager Treasury. Before NNPC, he worked at Mobil Producing Nigeria in several groups, culminating in his serving as Upstream Treasurer for ExxonMobil affiliates in Nigeria. He was nominated by the ARA Executive Committee in March 2020 and is awaiting confirmation in October 2020. Engineer Anthony Obuigwe, Chairman, PEJAD, Nigeria. Engineer Obuigwe was formerly President of the African Refiners Association. With over 38 years' experience in the oil and gas industry, with key positions in the NNPC Group and NLNG, he, a chartered engineer, fellow of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, Institute of Petroleum Studies, and British Institution of Chemical Engineers, sits on the boards of a number of companies. Captain Emmanuel Iheanacho, Executive Chairman, Integrated Oil and Gas Limited. He is the Chairman of Genesis Worldwide Shipping, an indigenous shipping operator and national carrier. Chairman of Integrated Oil and Gas Limited, an independent petroleum products marketer. A retired Navy captain and past Honorable Minister of Interior, he is an independent consultant on maritime issues who has been on the register of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development as an external consultant.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the session. Today's session 5 on refining trends and outlook for the petroleum industry in Africa. My name is Victor Onyegbado. You have had the citation of our eminently qualified panel of speakers read. So I think what remains to be done is for us to go right into the meat of today's discussions. The session is on petroleum refining trends and outlook for tomorrow's energy supply. We have Mr. Anibo Kraga, we have Engineer Obuigwe, we have Mr. Rachakonda, and we're also expecting Engineer Osarolube. I'd like to give the floor immediately to Anibo Kraga, who is the Secretary of the African Refiners Association, to take us through his presentation. So, Mr. Krager, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen. As Victor said, my name is Anibok Krager, the Executive Secretary of the African Refiners and Distributors Association. And I'm very happy to be here with you this morning to basically share with you a short Pan-African perspective on today's topic. This is basically what I'm going to go through. Brief introduction on the ARA. What is the business case for action? What are we here? What is the size of the prize that we're talking about? A bit about fuels roadmap, clean fuels roadmap that we're working on at the ARA, something about work groups, and an important topic for accomplishing anything, sustainable financing for our projects. About the ARA stands for the African Refiners and Distributors Association. Our mission is to serve as a leader in Africa's transition to cleaner fuels. We were formed in 2006. We changed our name in 2017 to represent the broader downstream supply chain. Our role is to give a unified voice to this amongst all stakeholders. We want to ensure that we champion investments across the supply chain and foster cooperation with all the stakeholders listed there, and ultimately promote African energy security. We want to maximize African crude oil into our African refineries. The resulting petroleum products, we want to push them through our storage and distribution infrastructure and get it financed primarily by our African financial institutions. Now, why is African energy security important? This is what I call my case for action or business case slide. And I think this slide basically summarizes the entire topic for today. And this is why. The International Energy Agency has actually projected in its Africa Outlook for 2019 that over the next 2 decades, 1 in 2 people born in the world is going to be African. So what that means is we're going to have an explosion in population over the next 2 decades, and we're going to need an increased amount of energy to meet their demands. The top chart on the top left shows the primary energy mix forecasted over that period. Like fossil fuels in Africa are going to grow significantly by close to 50% over the next 2 decades. In fact, when you look at the primary energy mix for Africa, fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas are going to be about 60% of that mix. So renewables are going to grow about 12 to 15 times over that period. But notwithstanding what happened this year with COVID and everything, over the next 2 decades, we're going to have significant growth in population, which is going to result in significant energy demand. The chart on the bottom left shows the increase in population over the next 2 decades. You can see that by 2035, we're going to have at least 30 cities in Africa which will have 5 million or more people in them. What does that mean for us? We are definitely going to have a renaissance in refining in Africa because we need to now reinvigorate our refining on the continent to meet the increased demand and reduce the imports over the period. There is projected to be importation of petroleum products over the next 2 decades, but there's a clarion call for refining across Africa at this point, as well as the associated storage and distribution infrastructure to reduce this importation to a minimum. On top of that, there's also a push for cleaner fuels. We need to make sure that we transition to cleaner fuels across the continent. Otherwise, with the projected population increase, we're going to have significant public health issues that we need to address. As a result, we need to ensure that we have a real Africa energy security plan that targets maximizing production of petroleum products on the continent and minimizing imports to meet the projected demand. To do this, of course, we're going to need financing to upgrade our refineries from the current state and the associated infrastructure to produce and transport these cleaner fuels. Now, over the next 2 slides, I'm going to take 2 case studies to show you kind of where things are on the continent now with regards to refining. I'll start just north of Niger. And this is a relatively small refinery, but we think it's a regional success story. It's only 20,000 barrels a day, but it's, I think, the newest in Africa. It was commissioned in 2011, I believe. But it basically focuses on what is important for the local market. It was basically configured to optimize the stranded crude, Niger is landlocked, and produce products that are needed in the market, LPG, gasoline, and diesel. And you can see the top right-hand chart shows the refinery performance. It's been very good, but it's not just meeting their local demand, it's also exporting to countries like northern Nigeria, Mali, and Burkina Faso. They have a good liberalization of products and all of that, but despite their success, if they're going to actually be able to meet the clean fuels challenge, they're going to need investment for desulfurization. ECOWAS, I'm not sure if you're aware, but ECOWAS has actually ratified that by 2025, all petroleum products produced in West Africa must meet 50 parts per million specifications, and they have to make some investment in that regard. So this is a small refinery, but doing very well. Let's go to the largest refining center in Africa for now, till Mr. Rachakonda and Dangote come on stream very soon. Then Nigeria will take that title from Egypt. But they have 8 refineries, about 782,000 barrels per day, and 5 processing plants. They have the oldest refinery in Africa, the El Nasser refinery, built in 1913, that's still operating. But they don't have a lot of upgrading equipment, and they still produce a lot of naphtha and fuel oil. So as a result, they have to import higher value gasoline as a result. What they've done, though, is they've embarked on major expansion and improvement programs over 6 of their refineries to meet this clean fuel challenge and to upgrade the value of their petroleum products. They have also announced a major clean fuels initiative to move away from gas and convert cars in the near future. So you can see that Africa is going to have a renaissance over the next 2 decades. We're going to need a lot of crude oil. We're going to need to refine it, but we need to focus on producing cleaner fuels. And that is why the African Refiners and Distributors Association and the African Union are collaborating on adoption of harmonized Pan-African fuel specifications such that across Africa we implement what we're calling AFRI-6 specs, or 10 parts per million of sulfur by 2030. And this implementation plan covers the health and socioeconomic benefits of cleaner fuels that I mentioned earlier. Again, critical success factor, money. We need to have financing in place so we can upgrade refineries and infrastructure to produce these cleaner fuels. I need to point out that the Clean Fuels Roadmap, you can't just get cleaner air in our cities and towns by just focusing on cleaner fuels. You have to also focus on cleaner vehicles as well. So we need to have a framework that focuses on cleaner fuels and cleaner vehicles for cleaner air. Now, I brought up financing earlier, and I think it's critical because for us to accomplish this on the continent, we need to focus on what is called sustainable financing. Okay, right now, everyone is aware fossil fuels are a no-no in financing circles, and the definition of sustainable finance, in quote, is anything that supports climate change. But that, of course, limits the pools of funding for African projects. And if we're really going to take advantage of the increased demand, increased population growth, and the like, and promote cleaner fuels, LPG adoption to replace biomass, and getting clean transport fuels, we need to finance the upgrade of refineries to produce these fuels and the associated distribution infrastructure. So what we need also is harmonized tariffs as well as the specs, and putting in place frameworks for sustainable investment for these refineries and infrastructure. So we are proposing what we call a sustainable plan for Africa, where it's 2 steps. First of all, secure financing for transitioning our refineries to produce these cleaner fuels. That's the first thing Africa needs right now. And the ARA is working with the African Union to put in place financing for upgrading and all of that to meet that. Then, when we're done, we can now mandate these environmental, social, and governance, or ESG obligations in the transition funding so that we can unlock the necessary financing to tackle climate change issues. Now let's get to, so at this point, there's demand. You have, let's assume you secured the funding and you're going to upgrade your refineries to meet this increased demand. Solomon Associates, it's a well-renowned firm, does an annual assessment called the world's best refineries. It looks at things like size, complexity, technology, and culture to look at how do you get 97% or higher operational availability across your refineries. And it came down to a simple thing, culture. You have to drive an outstanding performance excellence culture. You need, reliability, process maximization, staffing, and energy efficiency. These are all important to make sure that you actually have or target being a world's best refiner. This is what's important. It's not enough to just have a refining renaissance. We need to focus on getting world's best refineries in Africa. So the ARA has focused on doing this. One of our objectives is facilitation of best practices across members and our stakeholders. And we have 7 work groups that we believe will help as the investments coming position our refineries on the continent to deliver at the highest level. First of all, we have a refining and specifications work group. And the goal of this work group is to enhance overall plant performance and profitability, putting best technologies, but also making sure we upgrade the existing refineries to produce cleaner fuels. Second one is storage and distribution infrastructure. Now we need the world-class operations and maintenance for our terminals, depots, pipelines for LPG and hydrocarbons. LPG, we all agree, is a cleaner fuel of the future. We've put in place a work group to ensure that we can put a framework in place to promote LPG investments across Africa. We're actually working with a coalition called LPG for Sustainable Development Goal 7, Clean Fuels for All. And it's a coalition of a cross-section of individuals across the industry who are promoting this framework. HSEQ is another one, health, safety, environmental, and quality. Very important. I think HSE needs to be a license to operate issue. You could even argue that the single biggest event on business in 2020, COVID-19, is an HSE issue, and how organizations have responded to that has determined what their performance is. Regulation, we need to focus on meeting all the regulations in the countries that we're operating in. Human capital, extremely important. To build the right culture, you need the right human capital. We need to make sure we have strategic business goals matched with the right strategic human resources. We need to develop on the African continent, senior technical and commercial professionals who can help us meet our obligations. A lot of projects this year, commissioning have been delayed in Nigeria and beyond, whereby we had to wait for resources to come from Europe, United States, and Latin America or the like, because we didn't have the right human capital. And last but not least, how are we going to pay for it? We need to secure the right amount of sustainable financing to ensure that these projects can take place. So ultimately, we believe these work groups, and these work groups are staffed by individuals from about 12 countries across Africa, Nigeria included, but we have Ghana, Burkina Faso, Zambia, and the like, who are all working together on putting in place processes to help refiners across the continent to ultimately focus on targeting being the world's best refinery. So in summary, the last thing is, what are the requirements? If you could distill it, in my view, into what are the key things you need to do to actually focus on performance? First of all, you need to upgrade your refinery processes to produce cleaner, high-value petroleum products. You're not going to be able to sell your products in Africa if you don't meet cleaner fuel specs in the not-too-distant future. Once you've put in place the equipment, you need to have best-in-class operations and maintenance processes, including energy efficiency. You need to have the most efficient equipment that you have so you can reduce your costs accordingly. Health, safety, and environment and quality, this must be a license to operate so that we make sure that we're producing as safely as possible. You can make $1 billion in profit, but if you have one fatality, it's a bad financial year. And last, but definitely not least, we need to ensure that we have the right technical and commercial personnel in place to maximize performance from our assets and deliver on the ultimate challenge of reducing petroleum products across the continent. That's pretty much what I have, and thank you for your attention. And at this point, I will turn it back to Victor to take us through the rest of the program. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Mr. Krager. Mr. Krager has touched on quite very, very salient points, made the case for a renaissance of refining in Africa, took us through what he projects, a population boom in the next 2 decades on the African continent, and the need for cleaner fuels so that we don't have a public health crisis on our hands, dealing with all of that population that we're experiencing on the African continent. Then he also made the case for sustainable financing for not just new projects, but also for upgrade of existing refineries. He briefly talked about what he called the success story that we have up north of Nigeria, and then, of course, zeroed in on what happened in Egypt Long and short is that the existing refining capacity has to be upgraded to meet up with the specifications that are being projected for the future, and that in addition to just having equipment, just throwing money at projects, we also need the right people to man these operations. So that, in summary, has been what Mr. Krager dealt with. I'd like to turn it over to Engineer Anthony Obuigwe for his presentation. I'd like to remind our listeners, all our delegates, to have your questions ready for this panel. And when that time comes, we will take those questions. So, Engineer Obuigwe, you have the floor. Go ahead, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Victor. I want to thank Anibo for his presentation. In fact, he has laid the stage for what we are going to be sharing today. Can I have my presentation on the screen, please? And if you go straight away to slide number 2, which gives the summary of the points I'm going to be dealing with. There is definitely right now overcapacity in refineries in the developed world. However, as Anibo has said, the second point I'll be making is that the demand in Africa will still be growing right up to 2040. So there's sustained demand in Africa. The third thing I'll be focusing on is the fact that clean fuels will drive the product that will be expecting to come from the refining industry. And then finally, I'll be dealing with the fact that refineries must adapt to thrive. If they don't thrive, they will not even survive. Next slide, please. Right. There is currently an overcapacity in refining in Europe, Asia, and the Americas. This has led to shutdowns in Europe. We've had refineries closing, and the situation is going to happen to refineries in Africa if they do not up their game. The closures which have happened within the past 10 years have really tightened competition for markets among the refiners who are surviving. And worse still is the fact that the entire world is pushing forward towards renewable energy. And as Anibo mentioned, financing is preferably geared towards renewable energy projects. So if you're a refiner and you want to be able to attract financing, you must really up your game. The truth is that right now, only large plants with economies of scale and meeting the real demands of the market are able to survive in Europe, in Asia, and America. And very soon, the same thing will be the situation in Africa. Next slide. Like Anibo said, the International Energy Agency projects that demand in Africa will continue right up to 2040. Indeed, it might even extend to 2050. We are likely to see up to 45% increase in demand for petroleum products within Africa by 2040. This might continue to grow up to 2050. The fact that elsewhere in the world, there is a push to move away from fossil fuels more into renewable energy, while in Africa, there's this forecast that demand will continue to grow, is because Africa has been slower to adopt the new technologies. And that is why our demand will continue to grow. The other fact is that our population is projected to grow so much so that by 2040, 2050, Africa may in fact be leading the world in terms of population. And so we are going to continue to see this rise in demand for fossil fuels in Africa. However, the fact is also that we must therefore transit from the fuels which we are having right now, which are not meeting the health demands of the people and the low sulfur demands of our populace. So Africa has been slow in adopting the low sulfur fuels, slow in adopting high-tech auto-designed slow in adopting tighter emission controls. But this has to change. Renewable energy alternatives are pushing us to make this transition, and that transition must happen. Next slide, please. This is a slide which I borrowed from the African Refiners Association, of which Anibal is the executive secretary. I also consult for that association. And this makes the point, which Anibal made earlier, that clean fuels are just half of the challenge. We must also have clean vehicles if we are to arrive at the end objective of clean air. Clean air will enable us to live clean lives and healthier environments for all of us. So we must have clean fuels, we must also have clean vehicles. If you look at that slide, we have the emissions that are coming from the vehicles, those emissions go into the air. And therefore, if we have clean fuels, that would minimize the level of sulfur that is coming in the emissions. However, we must also adopt clean vehicle technologies so that together with clean fuels, we can then arrive at clean air for our people. Next slide, please. Therefore, if refineries on the continent are to survive, the configurations must change. As Anibal mentioned, the biggest refineries right now are in Egypt, but none of them is meeting the clean fuels. And as he mentioned, thankfully, a number of them are right now carrying out revamp projects so as to be able to improve the specifications of the products that they are producing. African refineries in sub-Saharan Africa must do the same. The African Union is pushing for a 50 ppm limit, both in gasoline and diesel, by 2025. In fact, the intention is that for all fuel that is imported into the continent, by next year, we should see these standards being met. Refineries in the continent are being given a waiver such that by 2025, mandatorily, they must meet the new standards of 50 ppm sulfur in gasoline, about 1% benzene in gasoline, and then 50 ppm sulfur in diesel with the cetane index no lower than 46 CI. Now, for the refineries in the continent to meet this, that means that there must be extensive revamping of the existing refineries. That means that there should be hydrodesulfurization of the FCC gasoline cuts that are produced from our refinery. We must also do benzene extraction of the reformate cost so that we bring down our benzene down to 2% and then eventually by 2030 down to 1% so that we can meet AFRI 6, which is the target by 2030. We must also have the hydrodesulfurization of diesel so that we achieve 50 ppm and then eventually 10 ppm. The advice that one will give to refiners really is that if you are doing your revamp projects right now, you should straight away target for 10 ppm because there's no point spending the money right now to revamp to 50 ppm and then you spend money again, revamp to 10 ppm to be able to meet the standards by 2030. As we all know, financing for refineries is a tough job right now. Next slide. What are the design considerations? There is going to be a gradual reduction in demand for petroleum products. There will be an increase in demand for petrochemical feedstock for the various industries that are going to meet the needs that all of us have in our life. You know, our cars, a lot of clothes, even pharmaceuticals, all depend on petrochemical feedstock. So the refineries must begin to revamp with the mind of providing feedstock that will meet petrochemical industry demands. That means really you should be making higher quality naphtha, which can go as petrochemical feedstock. Also, like I've said, you must produce low sulfur gasoline. If you are planning for your revamp project right now, the wise thing is for you to go for 10 ppm straight away. So you make ultra low sulfur gasoline and ultra low diesel as well. Like I've mentioned, there was going to be a growing demand for naphtha, for solvents, and for extraction for industrial production to grow in Africa. We must also begin to plan for production of the lubricants and the preservatives and the waxes, which again, industry will be demanding. We are all aware of what the International Maritime Organization has done, that this year, 2020, they introduced new regulations for the fuels that are used on ships. We must meet that. It looked like they missed out a point that I made on my slide. I made a point there that in refinery design, you must design for asset integrity. That means your assets must operate reliably. That means two things. Turnaround maintenance carried out regularly. In the old days, you used to do turnaround maintenance every 2 years. But if you manage your asset integrity properly, you can extend that to 3 years, or in some cases, even 3.5 to 4 years. So you must design your refinery for higher asset integrity. You must also design for reliability-centered maintenance. With reliability-centered maintenance, then you will find that your on-stream time will be higher, and your reliability will be higher, and your efficiency of operation will be higher. Only the refineries that are able to achieve these things will survive in the tough market that we are going to have in future. Next slide, please. Now, the reality is that refineries must design for top of the barrel products rather than bottom of the barrel products. Fuel oil should be de-emphasized progressively because the demand for that will go lower and lower as we move forward. Even diesel, the demand for diesel will be for higher quality diesel. Diesel that means 10 ppm, diesel that is good for vehicles that will then be running on efficient engines. And that means that really you must be producing very high quality diesel. We must move to a situation where we are having more LPG and CNG produced for vehicular use. And then, of course, like we said, establish more petrochemicals and fertilizer plants, which will drive industrialization. Next slide, please. Specifically for Nigeria, we're in a situation where the existing refineries have not been running. And that is because we have a monolithic structure in which we have just one owner of all the refineries. That has to change. If you look at this slide, there are 4 quarters in that slide there. We right now have a situation where the entire refineries are owned by the federal government. The NNPC has been trying within the past 3, 4, 5 years to get into a situation where they can bring in people to be interested in management, technical service contracts, to enable the refineries run. That has not really succeeded. Strategic investors with equity participation, that has been attempted. It has not really worked right now. We are going to see increasingly a move towards a situation of partial privatization. And most professionals in the industry right now are pushing and suggesting and recommending that we should move towards the situation where we have partial privatization. And that is the case where the refinery operates as an independent joint venture with majority equity held by the private sector entities who will then be actively involved in the management of the refinery. And by operating as independent joint ventures, have more efficiency in operation. Finally, in the next slide, I look at the PIB. The PIB is right now before the Senate and the House. And the PIB foresees a situation where we are going to have a completely deregulated refining industry. And that deregulated industry would also provide for partial privatization. If you go through the PIB, you will find that right in there are references to the need for partial privatization. if our refineries in the country are to survive, they must move into a situation where you have a mix of private and public equity in those refineries so that they can operate efficiently as independent joint ventures, insulated from the governance structures that are right now holding back the progress of the refineries. This is the only way that we will be able to ensure the reliability of our refineries. Also ensure that the quality of personnel that can enable the refineries to operate sustainably will be attracted and retained. Thank you very much. I just hasten to say that I agree with the conclusions that Anibo made in his last slide, that if we are to have world-class refinery operations in Africa, we must really have refineries that produce the clean fuels that we need and refineries that focus on HSE and asset integrity and the workforce that are going to operate the refineries in a sustainable manner for the future. Thank you.
I can see that Captain Emmanuel Ihanacho is on stage now. But before we go to Captain, I'd like to call on Mr. Rachakonda, who is from Dangote Group, to make his brief remarks before we turn over the floor to Captain Ihanacho. But just before we call on Mr. Rachakonda, Engineer Mwigwe also reiterated the point that 2040 and beyond, the demand for fossil fuels in Africa will continue to rise. Made the case again for cleaner fuels, specifically touching on the fact that African refineries have till 2025 to comply with required specifications, 50 ppm. So yes, he made that point. That he specifically drilled down to asset integrity and, of course, dealt with a question that has always been bothering my mind, which is what we must do with Nigeria's comatose refineries. So that, in summary, is what I got from Engineer Mwigwe's very, very excellent presentations. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Rachakonda. Mr. Rachakonda, if you can hear me, you can unmute yourself and let's have your remarks. Thank you very much.
I agree with all the speakers who said that the demand in Nigeria and Africa is going to grow. Okay, and some refineries in the Western world are definitely going to close, and clean fuels are going to be the order of the day. And we at Dangote believe in value addition and producing the products of highest order. So we are prepared to produce all Euro 5 compliant products of 10 ppm sulfur. We all know that post-COVID, or rather today, COVID is still continuing. There is a severe economic downturn everywhere in the world. That there are COVID restrictions. There is a fear psychosis to travel. And there are travel interruptions. There is a rise in telecommuting where people are working from home, and it is becoming something like a permanent feature. There is so all these are shifting the fuel demands in the entire world. Then there is an acceleration of shift to greener energy sources. Global growth of hydrocarbons, people are saying that is going to peak soon or maybe by 2030s. So that is going to have a significant impact on the global supply and demand. There will be excess refining capacity in other parts of the world is likely to shut, though Africa is going to grow. So in order to adopt, oil and gas companies have to transform radically. I would like to say that what was important in the history is no longer important today. What is important today may lose its value tomorrow. What is considered unviable today may become most viable in future. So we need to adopt continuously. We need to accept that we are in the mobility sector rather than in refining sector. We have to move from fuel stations to energy stations. So there is a significant demand in the way that we need to think and we need to act. I would like to say that at Dangote Refinery, we are producing 95% of our product is going to be gasoline, jet and diesel in terms of volume, and 3% of our product is polypropylene. So you can see at that 98% of our production, we are going to be adding value. Despite that, the margins today in the current markets have gone down tremendously, and particularly aviation fuel, gasoline, diesel, everything is under stress. So you can see that the future is going to be, we all are going to go through the severe ups and downs in terms of margins. As I said, in terms of gasoline, we are prepared to produce, we are going to produce 95 on octane, 10 ppm sulfur, less than 1% benzene, 35% volume aromatics, 16% volume olefins. These are all Euro 5 compliant. In terms of diesel, we are prepared to produce 51 cetane number, 46 cetane index or even more, 10 ppm sulfur, polyaromatics of less than 8%, and the suitable density. This is a considerable shift in Nigeria, going from current imports are of 500 ppm sulfur gasoline and 3000 ppm sulfur diesel. And we are prepared to produce 10 ppm sulfur of each of the products. So the future depends on improving the efficiency and competitiveness, both in terms of processing, distribution, and sales. So in terms of processing, we are going for process intensification with minimum reprocessing, minimal cost of processing, minimum use of energy, reduced emissions, reduced carbon footprint, and maximizing the recycle of water and waste. So these are the few things that we are doing. And we are also adopting to a new system where the world is going to need lesser and lesser aviation turbine fuel and more of, so we are putting up, we have initiated another project within our system. So we are trying to minimize our energy, doing the best of process and minimizing our water consumption and making the system more and more sustainable. We are putting up another diesel hydrotreater plant so that to convert as much ATF as possible into diesel because of declining demand in the ATF and declining the aviation sector especially, which is getting affected post-COVID. So as I said, we as a system need to start adopting ourselves to that we are in the mobility sector rather than in the refining sector. We are moving from fuel to energy stations. This is going to be a considerable shift in the way that we think and the way that we operate. It is not just as normal fuel distribution and retail. We are into a completely different chain. And that is the future that we are looking at. And although we have not yet started anything, but we would like to adopt to a completely new world. That's all I have to say.
In summary, what I heard you say was that the Dangote refinery is primed to produce clean fuels, 10 ppm for sulfur, below 1% benzene, and then the 90% of the products coming out of that refinery will be gasoline, jet fuels, and diesel. I have a few questions that I would love to ask you in that regard as we go along, but excellent presentation gives much hope for the prospects in Nigeria and also for Africa. I'd like to, at this time, we've heard from two experts, one person who has boots on the ground, who is getting his hands dirty with regards to what we are discussing today. I'd like to turn it over to Captain Emmanuel Ihanacho, who is also very, very passionate, who has a passionate way of communicating his thoughts regarding refining in Africa and particularly Nigeria. So Captain Ihanacho is the executive chairman of integrated oil and gas. And Captain Ichanacho, you have the floor. You have 10 to 12 minutes to take us through your thoughts on the subject. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I really do appreciate the OTL organization for giving us the opportunity of rubbing shoulders with experts in refining in terms of the program that we have this morning. Let me say from the onset that I am not an engineer, neither am I a refinery expert, not by any means. The thing is, you see, I am a mariner. I'm a marine expert professionally, and I'm also a businessman. And I have passionately felt that Nigeria was really underselling itself in terms of the trade that it conducted with the crude oil that we sold. Prior to now, we concentrated on selling crude oil, and we bring the oil up to the wellhead, and we sell it to people who then bring a vessel, take this oil, adding value to it. They take it to a refinery in Europe, add value to it by refining it. Then they put it on a vessel that does not belong to Nigerians and bring it back. And basically what this meant was that we were quite content, and in a very wrong way, to accrue benefits from that trade simply by bringing the oil to the wellhead. All the other value-added activities that really took place after the oil is loaded on the ship, we lost. So I felt, and I have, as a spokesman for shipping interest in the Nigerian shipping industry, I had always advocated a situation where at least we would bring Nigerian tankers to load oil that people were buying from us. But of course, over time, my interest has even shifted because I was talking about recapturing the resources, the interests that we lost from not shipping. But now I think that we can actually also add refining and also add the second level of transport, that's bringing the oil back. And that is how come I got involved in this business. Integrated oil and gas, you may not be hearing it all the time, but we've been engaged in the business of designing and implementing a refinery project. For instance, about a year or two ago, we were aware of the requirement for the sulfur content in fuel oil to be no more than 50 parts per million. Supposed to be designing plants that will conform with the Euro 5 standards. But of course, at that time, there were lots and lots of people who were interested in becoming refinery developers in Nigeria. But every time I interacted with them, they just didn't know. So in integrated oil and gas, an Eco Petrochem refinery located on Tomorrow Island in Lagos State, that is what we're doing. Let me say that in the last 1 year, one of the things that we have in further intellectual contributions to these issues, we've had to retain refining experts from America to come and have a look at the original plans that we had and look at it in terms of whether it conforms with what is expected in the future. We had in mind, and we were driven by the examples of what had happened both in South Africa and in Ghana. For instance, in South Africa years ago, they became aware of this problem and of the requirements for them to produce fuel of a higher standard generally. But the problem that they had was that every time they went back to the drawing board and they looked at the amount of investments that would be committed to achieving these standards, it just didn't make economic sense. So I think that at some point in time, they decided to just continue running their plans. But if they had any further investment, any new investment, then they would make an effort really to meet those standards. The same thing operates in Ghana here. In Ghana, for instance, you have the Tor refinery that is there. And Tor refinery produces to the old standards, I think maybe 3,000 parts per million or something like that. But when foreign suppliers supply the Ghanaian economy, they insist that the standards that are to be met are the new standards. And we hope within the space of the next few weeks, we will get a proper updated view of what we really should be doing, how much it will cost us, the implication that this has for the viability of the proposition as a whole. So we're at it. We think it's a good idea. We cannot operate as if we are different. I understand the attitude of some people who say, all right, we have up to 2025, I think it is, up to 2025 to continue to use the old technology, but after that, then we would be required to switch on to the other standards. So then it brings me back to what Engineer Buigwe said. He said, why are you going to plan for 50 parts per million standards when after you've done it, before you start implementing it, then there's a requirement for you to go down to doing 10 parts per million. So I think I really buy the idea and the suggestion that he gives that whomsoever might be involved in this business at this point in time must start making plans to ensure that they are in compliance in the future. I'm not entirely sure if there's any other thing that I really need to tell you about our refinery, but the only thing I'd like to say is that for those who have been wondering where we've been working at it. It's 4 years plus, and it isn't 4 years that we're sitting on our hands or anything like that. We're working all the time, trying to cope with the changes as they are happening, and I'd like to say to you, it isn't an easy business. Finally, I think that it's very important that the government engages with those who have brought themselves out to invest in refineries. If I had a choice as to where I would spend my money, to be honest with you, I would not have chosen to spend it in building a refinery. It's simply the fact that I believe that if we can make a fundamental change, instead of exporting our oil, we actually add value to it by refining it locally, it would absolutely trigger extraordinary growth in our economy. And that is why I invested in it. And I think the government should meet us halfway by coming to see how they can be of help. We know that the DPR is engaged with us in terms of technical validation. Let's have a look at your feasibility. Let's look at the feed. Let's look at the detailed engineering. That is a function that they have. But the promotional aspects of the development of refineries is something that the government ought to also invest in. For instance, we should be guaranteed crude availability for our refineries. There's no point in giving up. We really are thankful that they have considered a 60%, but why do you give us 60% and ask us to go into the market and buy 40%? Why not give us 100%? More particularly in a situation where the government actually, or the system, the administration insists that we will be paying market rates for the crude that we buy. Again, that is something that I'd like to take up because we have had interest from a lot of people when we started this business. Chinese people, they are there, they want to partner with us. And when they ask us about the crude, say, oh, we have a letter which says that we will get 60%. So, all right, what is the discount? Say no discount. No discount? What are they coming for? So really, if you understand that you have to grow our economy by developing these refineries, there must be some incentive that is given to those who are sticking their necks out so that people can then say, this is the reasons why we are forming a joint venture with them. Very quickly, I'd just like to talk about the PIB and the provisions that it makes. It would be a great idea, it would be a great day when the PIB is eventually signed into law, so that we now do all of these things according to what the market says, rather than having a lot of interferences that absolutely introduce costs and make life very difficult for Nigerians as a whole. So finally, I really like to align myself with what Dr. Buigwe did say, all the things that he has said. Excellent man. Also, Anibal Kraga. And I would also like to compliment the gentleman from Dangote for the presentation that he gave. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Captain Ihanacho. Captain Ihanacho started out by making the point that Nigeria truly undersells itself in the petroleum value chain. He's someone who started out advocating for Nigerian shipping interests in the petroleum industry. He has ended up taking the bull by the horns by attempting to refine on Nigerian soil. The refinery that he's promoting is a 20,000 barrels per day refinery, which incidentally is similar to what Mr. Krager referred to when he was making his presentation, what we have in Niger, which in Mr. Krager's words is a success story, relatively. He also ended up by soliciting for government incentive, not just technical, but also promotional. In simple terms, he asked for discounts on crude feedstock. Ladies and gentlemen, that was my perception of Captain Ihan Acho's very eloquent and very passionate presentation. Captain Ihan Acho, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. We'll be going into the questions and answer sessions. I have a few questions that I'll throw to the speakers. I'd like to use this opportunity to remind our audience to pen down their own questions. As we progress, we will call upon you to give your questions. But the very first question I would like to put across is to Engineer Obuigwe. Engineer Obuigwe, over 40 licenses for refineries have been issued by the Nigerian government. A good number of them, modular refineries. After all the fanfare, Engineer Obuigwe, I hope you can hear me very well.
Yes,
Hello?
I'm hearing you very well. Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying that after these refinery licenses have been issued, not much seems to be happening with regards to establishment and rolling off of modular refineries in Nigeria. So I would like to ask you, what do you think is the cost for the limited investments that we are seeing in Nigeria for modular refineries?
There are a number of reasons.
Yes.
The first is that the major cost element in refinery economics is the cost of crude. That's the reality. And unless you have crude costs within control, then you are not likely to make much progress. Your economy will be tough. The only modular refinery that is operating right now in the country is the Niger Delta Petroleum Resources Refinery, which was 1,000 barrels per day, but has been upgraded to 5,000 barrels per day. Now, the advantage they have is that that refinery is wholly owned by the Niger Delta Petroleum Resources Company, who themselves produce crude oil. So it's simply a case of the owner just sending his crude across to the refinery. He refines it there. The owner also needs the diesel, and he takes the diesel for his operations. So you find that his economics is beautiful, and it worked out for him. Any diesel that he doesn't need for his own operations, he has gotten into agreements with people who just come to the refinery gate, need the diesel, and so his costs are very low in terms of transportation of his diesel. His costs are entirely non-existent with respect to crude transportation. And there is also this major issue we've had in Nigeria, that it has been difficult supplying crude to the refineries. What many people do not know is that the existing refineries owned by NNPC have been spending significant amounts of money just to get crude to the refineries during the times that they were operating. I know for a fact that when I was the group executive director of refineries and petrochemicals, we were spending more than $7 per barrel just to deliver crude to Warri Refinery. When you find that in the refinery economics is such that your margin is not going to be much better than $4 per barrel, then you are not going to be in business if it's costing you $7 per barrel to deliver your crude to your refinery. So the economics of buying crude and then getting it to the refinery is what has been the challenge. And like Captain Inacho mentioned, you find that guaranteed access to crude supply is one of the things that has affected a lot of the modular refinery interest from becoming reality. Thankfully, we have two or three modular refineries that are almost at the point of being commissioned now. There is the modular refinery in Bayelsa State, Azekan refinery. I understand that they are soon going to complete their construction, and then they will go into the next phase of commissioning, and then hopefully they will eventually begin to operate. The Walter Smith refinery in Imo State is also pretty close to completion, and we hope that they too will come into operation shortly. I know that there are a number of other refinery projects that are going through the pipeline. Captain Inacho's refinery is one of them. There's also the Alexis refinery that I know there's a group that is involved in trying to see that project come to reality. So I hope I've answered the question. One is access to crude, assured access to crude, financing, and then, of course, having the enabling environment in terms of the market determining the price of what you produce. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much.
Can I come in here? I really like to address that question because it comes up in every conference that I go to. Somebody always invariably says, why is it then that, they've given 40 licenses and only 4 come through? The truth of the matter is those who wish to establish modular refineries mostly understate the amount of work that is required. To start with, you have to articulate a plan for the market study. Then you have to articulate a bankable feasibility study. Then you have to go on and do a front-end engineering study. As in our case, we had to do an additional study after the FEED had been passed by the DPR. Because, as you know, the United States Trade Development Agency came to our aid because we were floundering somewhat and didn't have any resources at that time to pay for any additional studies. And so they paid for us to do the detailed engineering study. And once we had done that, and we thought that we'll go forward, we looked at the numbers. It didn't work because if you look at it, for instance, we've talked about some of the refineries that are actually going to come on stream shortly. But the truth of the matter is, if you look at them, those refineries are refineries who have oil wells in close proximity to the physical location of that refinery. So exactly as Dr. Buigwe said to you, the transport cost is absolutely zilch because they just take the oil from there, put it there, refine it, and then if they produce things like naphtha, then they take that naphtha and just spike it back into the production stream, and there is no cost there. It applies to the Niger Delta refinery, it applies to the Walter Smith refinery, and I think it's applying to 2 other smaller refineries in Edo or Delta states. But you understand that the actual cost of any refinery, you could have 2 refineries that are 20,000 barrels per day refinery, but the cost of establishing them would be different because there are factors that play a role in determining the run of costs. Do you have a port in close proximity already in existence? For instance, in my own situation, we're located on an island property and we don't have any docking arrangements. And so we have to factor into what we're doing the cost of developing the docking structures, the cost of developing piping infrastructure that will take the crude into the refinery location. So all of these things are coming to play. So you see, 40 people can get that license. And if I tell you the number of other specialized consultancies that you have to bring legal due diligence in, you have to bring somebody like we have done now to review what the former EPC guy was going to do. You have to do so many things. It is so much that a lot of people will not be able to do it. And if you then look at it in relation to the help or any program that the government has set up for assisting, it's non-existent. If government gives you a piece of paper to say that we are going to give you 60% of your crude requirement at market rates, what have they given you really? Have they given you, they could give you a guarantee, for instance, that people could take to the bank to say that, yes, we know these guys, they've done their feed, We absolutely know who they are, and we are going to back them. And so it will be easy for people to raise a finance for their project. But if the government does not give it, and the administration has no plans for that, and you are expected to do it, who is going to stand behind you and validate all the things that you are proposing? So these are all the factors that come into play and make it difficult for those who wishful thinking and they want to have a refinery, and they are all patriots, by the way, because I meet them at conferences, and you just have to look in their eyes and you see refinery just pumping out of their eyes all the time. So I think that the time has come for us to look seriously at this issue. We must not continue to make the statement that only 4 people out of 40. We must get down and study why those only 4 people came through.
Victor, sorry. Yeah, just one more point to add to the other comments raised by the two distinguished gentlemen. The other thing about crude costs is that a lot of these refineries, for you to cover your crude costs, you actually have to invest in FCC technology to get higher value products. So if you're not producing gasoline, jet fuel, and the like the gentleman from Dangote mentioned, you are not going to cover the cost of your crude. Yeah. So in the event where you are producing gasoline, you're producing diesel, fuel oil, and the like, yes, you're producing petroleum products, in quotes, definitely, but they are not the highest value ones. So ultimately, if you're having to re-inject naphtha and the like, that works when your refinery is 1,000 barrels per day, maybe 5,000, and you have a stream to re-inject it to. But if you're a businessman, as Captain Iheanacho said, which I love that term, because I always say I'm not a refiner, I'm a businessman in the business of refining. You have to invest in the downstream units that add value to the crude. Otherwise, you will be destroying value of the crude, and you will not be able to cover the cost of your crude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent interventions. Now, my next question, and that will come to you straight up, Mr. Krager. But in the meantime, I understand that Engineer Osaro Lube is attempting to join us. I don't know if he has joined. When he does come in, we will give him an opportunity to also make his presentations. I would like to, dive straight to the question that I was posing to Mr. Krager.
Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Krager, I read an article about 2 or 3 months ago on The Guardian, alluding to the fact that the petrol sold in Nigeria, coming from Europe, is dirtier than the black market bush oil, which is what the Niger Delta, our brothers in the Niger Delta refine and sell. So my question, kind of contrasts with the remarks that Captain Iheanacho made about how detailed your analysis, business-wise and technical-wise. So my question is, if that is the case, should Nigeria, as a matter of policy, not start looking at how to mainstream what is going on in the Niger Delta? What keeps going on, if indeed it is true that what they are producing in the black markets is a bit cleaner than what we are getting, what we are spending so much of our money importing? Should we not start mainstreaming that refining that's going on in the Niger Delta by people who are doing it as a shady business, and see if capacity can even be built going forward from there? What's your thoughts on that?
Victor, thank you for the difficult question. You're talking about the SDN report that was put in the papers. Well, thank you for the question. If I understand it, your question is that if the rumored reports by the SDN that artisan refiners, in quotes, are producing cleaner fuel than some of what is imported, how do we mainstream them? Correct?
Yes, correct.
So,
exactly.
so I'll put it this way. So the area our focus is on commercial refinery operations. I'll say that again, commercial. Commercial ties into what the last two gentlemen said, Engineer Gwigwe and Captain Iheanacho. Commercial alludes to the fact that you actually are buying your crude at market price, and you're actually now running it through the right type of equipment to get the type of the type of fuels we're talking about. And ultimately, we're talking about cleaner fuel. So ultimately, when you talk about mainstreaming, I think I have to take a step back and talk about commercial refinery operations. So one, you need to get your crude at market price. Two, you need to invest in technology that will produce higher value products so that you're able to cover the cost of that crude and be commercial. And three, you also need to invest in desulfurization technology, as Engineer Buigwe so eloquently put it, to make sure you're now producing cleaner fuels, because remember that ECOWAS and the African Union are putting in place clean fuel specs such that you will not be able to sell petroleum products that are not clean fuels in Africa in the near future. So with that in mind, I think ultimately, if there is capacity to do that, definitely the African Refinery and Distribution Association would support that, provided it is commercial. Provided that, and commercial means you have to have people come together to actually do commercial refining operations. And Bugbe put it very eloquently in his presentation. The rest of the world is moving to larger refineries, to more complex refineries. In fact, there was a presentation that I just concluded, African Refiners and Distribution, ARA Week 2020, where Honeywell and UOP talked about the refinery of the future. For Africa, the refinery of the future is going to be a blend of, it's very similar to the Dangote refinery, products and petrochemicals. So yes, is there a case for smaller refineries? Is there a case for bringing together different refining operations and mainstreaming them, provided they are commercial, provided they are adding value to the crude so that they can cover their crude costs and be profitable, provided they have the right HSE practices, because there's no discussion there. They're talking about what is produced. They're not talking about potential pollution and the like from those artisan refineries. Provided all of those protocols are put in place and they are producing cleaner fuels, I think there's a case that can be made for that, provided there's a structure to do all those things appropriately. But as Engineer Bugbe rightly said, refineries going forward must evolve or thrive. Sorry, must evolve or die. The fact that you're artisanal today and you're able to produce, if there's a regulation, because ECOWAS has already passed AFRI 5, which is 50 parts per million. Okay, Ghana is already doing it. They're saying that all imports into the region by next year must be 50 parts per million. By 2025, anything sold in ECOWAS must be 50 parts per million. But in reality, if the African Union, which we are working with to get adopted by early next year, is going to 10 parts per million, how are we going to bring these guys along to do all those things and produce commercially 10 parts per million sulfur petroleum products? Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add something. Thank you, Mr. Kraga.
Yes, Mr. Rajakonda, I'll give you an opportunity to intervene. I'd like to throw the same question to Engineer Buigwe. Engineer Buigwe, after you've commented on it, I would also like Mr. Rajakonda to comment on it. So, in simple terms, Engineer Buigwe, my question is, should we get these guys into cooperative societies, give them some kind of trainings, and have them produce, even if it is diesel, for their immediate local markets? Is that something local governments, state governments, the Nigerian government should start pushing towards?
Well, I should make the point and make it very, very firmly that for those refineries to at all be called refineries, those artisanal refineries, so right now they are not paying for the crude. And that is why they are doing what they are doing. And by the way, for goodness sake, there is a basic fact that many people miss. Our crude is sweet crude, okay? And most of the crude they are stealing is Bonny light crude, which is in itself low sulfur crude. So even if you just distill Bonny light crude, you are going to get diesel, which is going to be about 600 to 700 parts per million. That is lower than the 3,000 parts per million, which is what the standard was. So the SDN report, was not actually saying anything that is okay, because our crude is sweet. So when you take our crude and you just distill it, simple distillation, you are going to get diesel that is 600 to 700 parts per million, okay, which is better than what you are getting if you are importing 3,000 parts per million. However, thank God, thank goodness, maybe I should just mention it here. People have been shy to mention it. But the truth is that NNPC, right now, the crude that NNPC is importing and selling already meets 50 ppm diesel. Okay? I was part of a committee that was put together by the Nigerian Society of Chemical Engineers, and we looked at how we can push for clean fuels to become the norm in Nigeria. And we found out that NNPC is actually, since late last year, they've been importing 50 ppm diesel, okay? And gasoline is down to 150 ppm. So that is good. Maybe that's something that should be publicized. It's been done quietly, very quietly, but that's a good step in the right direction. So going back to the question, the artisanal refiners, yes, we should get them to move away from the illegal refining they are doing right now because they are stealing the crude. Let them, if they want to be in the business, let them buy the crude and then refine it. If they buy the crude, then they will discover immediately that they cannot do what they are doing. Then they will want to add more value to that crude. And adding more value to the crude means that you must produce gasoline, you must produce naphtha, and you must have an efficient way of evacuating your production for the people that need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr.
Let me make one point. Part of the justification that the federal government had in wanting to support establishment of more modular refineries was in some way to convince these chaps who are currently involved in these artisanal refineries to move across into the modular refineries. Because the expectation was that the modular refiners would buy the crude and then refine it commercially and sell the products commercially and not damage the environment like the artisanal refineries are doing. It's terrible if you go to where they are operating. So much environmental damage has happened. So much pollution has happened. We cannot permit that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rajakonda, you could just take 30 seconds to make your brief comments on that point so that we can move on to another question. Yes.
Yeah. I sincerely appreciate what Engineer Anthony has said. He put it straight, and Mr. Kraga has put it more diplomatically. If people buy the crude and if they process it, okay, because Nigerian crudes are low sulfur, yes, they are able to meet sulfur specification. What about other specifications? They can never produce gasoline. They can never produce, if kerosene and gas oil are mixed, there is no way that they can meet diesel specifications. They are just selling a product and they are calling it diesel. Mm-hmm. So it cannot continue, that the kind of pollution that they are going to make. They cannot, it is not viable or economical for them to put up any hydrotreating facilities. So tomorrow, if 50 ppm or 10 ppm, there's no way that they can meet. Only thanks to the crude of Nigeria that they are able to produce low sulfur. The sulfur is the only criterion that they are meeting and nothing else. It's not a viable operation for anybody. Exactly. It's not economically viable operation if they pay for the crude.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before I move to the next question, I would like to find out if Engineer Osarolube is ready with his presentation or his remarks. And then we can proceed with the questions and answers.
So first, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be part of this meeting for the first time. And I'll just run through what I have. I'm sure that these are generic things that most of the previous speakers have gone through, but I'll just run through them. Can you see my slides?
Not yet. If you sent it in, then the OTL secretariat.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So you could.
My TA sent it to your mail this morning.
All right. The slide will come up shortly. Yes. We can see your slides now, sir.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So like I said, most of the things there are generic, so I won't waste much time to go through them. I'll just rush through them. And a lot of us there are familiar with the issues there, but just for completing purposes, so that I can take any questions. So as we're all aware, the world energy system is going through a transition between fossil and non-fossil energy sources. And of course, the factor that will drive this will be development in policies, technologies, and associated costs. Then the problem that we all face this year, the COVID-19 pandemic, will have a very great impact on our lives and livelihoods. So that now in the near future, the impact will be great, especially as we experience what we call the new normal now. Pandemic-linked behavioral shifts like working remotely. As I speak now, I'm working from the house because we have a curfew in my area due to the recent situation. So I'm working from home. Things like this, people having to reduce office space, reducing transportation due to these effects. So all this will have an impact on the energy use at the end of the day. Of course, we know the oil and gas industry for some time to come will continue to play an important role in this portfolio, in this mix of between the fossil and non-fossil sources. And hydrocarbons are projected to account for about 44% of the global energy mix near 2015, down from 53% in 2017. And of course, investment will be needed to add new oil and gas production capacity and also to operate our existing assets safely and sustainably over this period so that we can deliver outputs that can meet, as we're aware, particularly in Africa, we're not able to refine the quantity that we need. So global refining demand, of course, is expected to hike very slightly in 2022, but will now get down in about towards 2050 because of the shift in fuel and energy demand in transport sector. And of course, as we all know, gas is taking the center stage now because of obvious reasons that we know, cleanness and things like that. Now, on the global and Africa energy demand, again, the pictures are there on the left, showing that in the near future, oil will remain dominant, and then followed by coal and gas. In Africa also, just like the world, oil too has a dominant feature in the energy mix, 42 for oil, and as against 27 for coal and 22 for gas. So if you look at the chart on the left, again, oil is there at the top, but beyond 2040, the demand for oil is going to kind of flatten, while the renewables will gradually gain ground, of course, due to low cost and increasing need to produce cleaner fuels, which I overheard some of the speakers talking about. Of course, coal is losing its market share, and over time, the renewables will actually take over, followed by gas. You can see there that the likes of solar, wind, and geothermal are growing at about 6.6% per annum on average, and which is very fast. And over time, we eventually take over the traditional energy sources. Now, for Africa, if you check right on the left, Africa contributes only about 3.7% of the present world refining capacity, which leaves it with a large deficit that needs to be made up from imports. From the PwC of 2019, Africa's total production is about 8.2 million barrels per day. And this actually outweighs our refining capacity and more than double the amount we actually consume. Unfortunately, lack of investments and resulting in failed infrastructure have made our refining capacity very low in the region. Talking about, I heard Krager and a few others talking about quality fuels. In terms of conversion facilities or tail improving facilities and desulfurization facilities, Africa is actually behind. And of course, the reasons are very obvious. Those projects are capital intensive. Upgrades and modernization projects are heavily capital intensive. And of course, knowing our situation is a bit difficult to raise the funds necessary to bring these things to where they should be. And then, but all hope is not lost. Significant capacity addition is expected in Africa, about 0.8 million barrels per day, which is about 15% of global volume in the medium term. We are glad that our brother Dangote is hopefully coming on stream very soon with a whopping 250,000 barrels per day refinery in Nigeria. The Middle East and Asia will account for 10%, in the medium term, and Africa will account for the numbers you are seeing there. The charts are on the left, and they are very clear to see. So, refining trends in Africa, like we said, Africa is set to change the story of refining because more countries in the region are beginning to announce plans for both new refineries and for upgrading of existing ones. Now, what we're going to see is that simpler refineries will attempt to add secondary units, just like Engineer Krager said, units which can upgrade products to at least bottom of the barrel down. We generally see new refineries, eventually, right from the onset, we go for complex refineries. But existing ones, we make effort to upgrade them so that we can have better quality products. Like we said, new crude capacities are being proposed particularly in North and West Africa. And then more upgrade is also planned to limit sulfur and other bring in quality products. All these are aimed at meeting expected increase in demand, as well as reduce Africa's reliance on imports of refined products and eventually become a net exporter of refined products in the future. So we have some countries where progress is being made at the moment for either new capacity addition or upgrade of existing facilities to meet the restrictions. These are Egypt, Algeria, Libya, Nigeria, Angola, South Africa, and Uganda. Now, I don't have three things out of the so many that I see as potential drivers for future refining in Africa. One is expanding population. If you check on your left, this year, Africa accounts for about 70.2% of world population, but in 2035, we account for about 21.15%. So this will have significant impact on Africa's energy demand and refining capacity. The economic prosperity, GDP, will also impact on our energy future. And then energy security. Of course, the African region has the drive to make sure that in the near future, we don't depend on importation. And you can see so many countries that are actually making efforts as we speak to bring on new capacities and upgrade what they have. Now, for Nigeria, NNPC refineries, as you can see, this is a very familiar chart. These are our installed capacities. Warri, 125,000 barrels per day. Port Harcourt, 210,000 barrels per day for the two plants. And then Kaduna is 110,000 barrels per day, a total of 445,000 barrels per day. We are aware that given our present consumption level, even if all these refineries run at full capacity, for PMS, which is a gasoline, we should be making about 18 million liters, which is still inadequate. That means that we need more capacities to be able to meet our local demand in Nigeria. As we speak, all the three refineries are on shutdown for the purpose of plant rehabilitation. Over the years, yes, turnaround maintenance happened at one time or the other, but I can tell you that the traditional turnaround maintenance, which we call TAM, the last time it happened in Port Harcourt was year 2000. The last time it happened in Warri was year 2004. And the last time it happened in Kaduna Refinery is year 2008. The traditional turnaround maintenance for the 5 days. So all this have given rise to the very poor state of our refineries, very poor state, lead to very low capacity utilization. So the NNPC and the federal government decided, look, there's no need going on these piecemeal interventions. Let's go into a full rehabilitation where we can restore these refineries back to close to nameplate capacity. And that is the journey that NNPC, as we speak, is embarking on. And as we speak, the process is ongoing. And for Port Harcourt, I want to tell us that the auditing is completed and IITs have been issued. And the bids from potential EPC contractors are expected to be turned in this November for evaluation, leading to award. That's for Port Harcourt Refinery. And then for Warri and Kaduna, we have already engaged the project management consultants to owners engineer. That engagement is completed, and as we speak, technical audits of the facilities are ongoing, which eventually lead to development of EPC scope. And at the same time, the financing arrangements are ongoing for the refineries. So under the key objectives. You can see the mandate we have from the federal government to fix the refineries to a minimum of 90% installed capacity. Then we are also collaborating with private sector to expand in-country capacity and stop importation. In fact, the target is eventually be a net exporter of refined petroleum products. We're also championing the development of like condensate refinery is a project that is there to our heart in NNPC right now. And as my boss in the ARA has said, we're also putting our eyes on developing clean fuels to meet the requirement restriction from ARA in the near future. So I think in a nutshell, this is what I have, because I know that most of these things would have been shared by my previous speakers. Thank you. Now, again, somebody mentioned about making profit. If we want to make profit in refining, then you can see the net back minus cost of crude. Cost of crude is a major object in the final operation. Is huge. So for us to make profit, then the product mix is important. What is our refinery size? What is the configuration? Where is the complexity? Do we have conversion units? Do we have upgrade units? It is until we make lighter products that we can make money and recover our business. So we need to work on a variable cost. Energy conservation in the refinery is very key. Energy is one area we lose money is energy conservation waste in the refinery. Efficient procurement systems, proper negotiations of contracts and the procurement. Then automation, which will help us in optimization of our plants and avoid wastages. This is key. The safety is important. And then crude type and cost. If we have an upgraded system, we can go for we can go for high sulfur crude, yes, but because we have those facilities to desulfurize them, we buy them cheaply, and then we can now produce lighter products and make more money. So crude type is key and cost in the refinery margin. So I'd like to say that a fair forecast of the most likely energy future is imperative as a guide to strategic choices over the years to come. The Africa has a promising energy future. However, investments will be needed to ensure these resources are developed safely, responsibly, and in a way that benefits the overall populations of African nations. I want to thank you for the opportunity.
I was saying thank you to Engineer Osaro Lube for making a most efficient use of the time. He talked about ongoing plans at not only turning around and maintaining the refineries that we do have, the NNPC refineries, but also, radically upgrade them. I have a question which someone has even asked in the discussion panel, which I will bring to you, engineer, in the course of the day. I was saying that the time now is 11:47, so we have barely about 12 minutes to round off this session. And that brings me to the question that I want to send to Mr. Rachakonda. African states, virtually all African states have signed up to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Could you give an insight, some kind of insight, on the impact that full implementation of that agreement may have on the refining landscape? Mr. Krager, you may also want to take a few seconds to comment on the same question. But to Mr. Rachakonda, after, what impact might it have on the refining landscape across the continent, and particularly for Nigeria and your project, the Dangote refinery?
I think I'm not so familiar with the topic. I would like to pass it on.
Okay, that's lovely. Mr. Krager.
Okay, thank you very much, Victor. So this is the African Free Trade Act, and essentially, for it to work for refining, I think what I had mentioned that we're working on, what ARA and the African Union are working on, which is the Afri Clean Fuels Roadmap, is fundamental. We need to harmonize specs across the continent. So if Dangote produces in Nigeria, he can export anywhere he wants on the continent because it's the same fuel specs and it's a requirement for anyone to do business across the continent. That's first. Secondly, you have to also put in place tariffs, harmonized tariffs across the continent as well, so that will reduce smuggling, adulteration, and the like. Okay, but you also have to look at what is the storage and distribution infrastructure that we have across Africa today. Having a refinery is one thing, but how do you get your products as efficiently across the continent as possible so that you can actually deliver as efficiently as possible and make as much money? One of the things we have not talked about that would also support that is something that I started working on with the GMD a while back. It's called a WAF benchmark, a West African benchmark for petroleum products. Right now, all petroleum products that are traded in Africa are done with Rotterdam as more or less the basis of pricing. You do it ex-Rotterdam, then you put freight and the like. Well, once refineries like Dangote start producing and other refineries on the continent, we need to have our own benchmark within Africa where we say it's a transparent benchmark that is actually put such that you can maximize the value of all petroleum products coming from those refineries. And now you just look at freight and other factors that we can very easily figure out. And ultimately, people will get the most value. So one, harmonization of clean fuel specs, which is being done now across the continent, harmonization of tariffs as well. But we also need to put in place a benchmark that is transparent, that everyone can relate to. I always say it will never be cheaper to bring 50 KT of AGO from Port Harcourt, from Rotterdam to Lagos than from Port Harcourt to Lagos. If Port Harcourt is producing and you know what the freight is, you can get the best value and everything. So that's ultimately what we're promoting. Harmonized specs, harmonized tariffs, a strong, transparent benchmark for petroleum products. And last but not least, we also have to talk about not just refining, but how are we going to put in place the right storage and distribution infrastructure so that we can deliver the petroleum products effective, safely, and efficiently across the continent. Thank you.
Excellent.
Victor, if I may come in here very quickly. We already have a number of distribution companies that are players in the African continent. Interestingly, some of them facilities in South Africa, they have storage facilities in East Africa, they have storage facilities in West Africa. So they're able to move products across the region. You will find that if entities like Dangote begin to operate, then these players can go and lift products from Dangote and move them to their facilities in the other African countries. That will begin to give real effect to AfTA, which is the African Free Trade Area Act. We need for this to happen very much so that we begin to lock in the value in Africa of the resources that we have in Africa. Right now, a lot of our value is being lost to players in other parts of the world. If Ian Achor will be interested in my next comment, that has to do with shipping. Okay, most of the oil products are being moved by shippers outside of Africa. So we need for the players within Africa to be encouraged by the African Free Trade Act to increase their capacity so that they can move those products within the African continent, and they should be able to take the advantage of their being in the continent. They have shorter distances to traverse, and so they should charge lower freight rates. This goes back to the tariffs. We hope that African Union can deal with the issue of tariffs as a whole. Thank you.
I agree with you. Just to add again, I made the point we need to focus on African energy security. We need to make sure that ACTFA should also help us bring that to life. Let's make sure we maximize African crude oil, push it into our refineries first before we send it off out of the continent. Let's make sure that we sweat our storage and distribution infrastructure. Let's make sure that we use our banks to do this. One point that has not been made is most of the refining capacity that has come on stream over the last few years has been east of the Suez Canal, Middle East and Asia, right? But their populations are growing as well. So what happens when we continue to rely on them for imports and their populations grow and they have to meet those demands? Is that the time when Africa will now be looking at putting in place refining capacity? So let us use ACFA as a channel to grow our refining capacity, grow our storage and distribution infrastructure, and put in place an energy security plan for the continent. Thank you.
I would like to add a small thing that West Africa itself requires another refinery as big as Dangote's refinery.
Exactly.
Okay, that is going to make a big difference. And in terms of benchmarking or to what is going to be produced in Nigeria, I think we need to be realistic because all these refineries are extremely capital intensive. And if you look at today, there is no protection on importing the product. There are no duties. Like in other countries, there were duties to protect the refineries. In Nigeria, there is no duty to protect anything, protect the refinery. So the product pricing, okay, it needs to be realistically benchmarked to what is going to be the alternative import price, import cost of whatever be the product.
Import parity.
You cannot be assuming, nobody can assume that the prices have to come down in Nigeria or in rest of Africa.
So sorry, I think also regional collaboration will help, because
regional collaboration will absolutely help, and also as you pointed out, the prices are so different between Nigeria and its neighboring countries.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're almost like 2.5, 3 times the price. So it has been giving a big incentive for products to be smuggled across different countries. I think that has to stop.
Yes, that has to be addressed.
Thank you very much. Excellent interventions. Looking at the Q&A section, I see quite a number of interventions. Mr. Adetunji Oyebanji, I understand from Double One PLC, has actually been making some insightful comments. If Mr. Adetunji Oyebanji is here, we may want to bring you on stage to make a few comments. Mr. Adetunji Oyebanji, if you could please raise your hands so we could bring you on stage to make your comments or ask a few questions. I have a question here. Say, how does a continent that is facing severe revenue shortage hope to raise funds for fossil fuel projects? So that, I think, I'll throw to Mr. Kraga, and that question is from Chukwu Nonso Ude. So he's asking basically, how does a continent that is facing severe revenue shortages hope to raise funds for fossil fuel projects?
Thank you very much, Victor. I think it goes back to what quite a few people have said today. If a project is commercial, it's commercial, right? If a project is standalone, it's commercial and can pay back the loans or financing it takes on, then it's commercial. We've said here that Africa as a whole, the demand is going to grow exponentially. We've said here that that oil is going to be massive in the projections for Africa, oil and natural gas. If that is the case, commercial refinery projects will be viable. Mr. Rachakonda mentioned that Africa needs at least another refinery as big as Dangote. We may not be able to from a singular capital intensity standpoint, but that means that there are other options to do so. So the question is, how do you make your refinery viable? Now, one of the points that was raised by Standard Bank and the IFC in our ARA Week 2020 was the point that there's a pool of what they call transition funding available now, which is available to make for existing refineries, make them less brown and more green. How do you put in place better technology that allows you to produce cleaner fuels? That is there. So that's for existing refineries. For new refineries, provided you can demonstrate that you can be commercially viable, you have a market, and you can repay the facility, definitely you get financing. One of the points I made was that ARA has a sustainable financing workgroup, which I am actually leading, along with the finance and admin director from SIR Refinery. SIR Refinery was able to raise 577 million euros last year through the Africa Finance Corporation. They did that with all these challenges you're talking about. SAR Refinery in Senegal, the ARA president is from SAR Refinery. They're in the process of securing funding as well. In fact, they even put just 2 weeks ago, I was at this signing ceremony in Senegal where they actually just got 200 million euros for actually a revolver to ensure that they could secure the crude costs, to secure the crude for their refinery. So there's financing available provided your refinery is commercially viable. and for commercially viable projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Krager. Just one last question, and that's the question from Mr. Clement Isong. And I'll throw that question to Engineer Osaro Lugbe. His question is simple. He's asking, are you going to upgrade the refineries to meet new product specifications? Engineer.
Okay, thank you. The current journey is a two-stage approach. The first stage is to get the refineries back to close to full nameplate capacity, 90% maximum capacity at the end of the rehab. And then I say stage two, because like we all know, and we need to tell ourselves the truth. Somebody mentioned it just now. Capital in Africa is a challenge. Raising this, and I mentioned it on one of my slides, modernization and upgrade costs are very capital intensive. So the first stage of our project now is to move to reasonable capacity from where we are today, and then we'll build up on that, because we're going to have a new model of operation at the end of the day, where we're going to bring in experts who are going to run with us and run profitably. So at the end of that phase, we are going to move to the next phase, where is the upgrade will not come in. So that's like the engineer will say, we should tell us the truth. That is what it is now. So the first phase of this project is to raise up our capacity. Then the second phase is to actually go on upgrade and modernization to meet this. So we need some time actually to get there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, the time at the moment is just about noon, and I think we've done an excellent job at keeping to time. But one more question before I call on our speakers to give their opening remarks. I see a question from Gavin Madoa, and he says, and his question goes to Engineer Ezekiel Osarolube. What are the plans that NNPC and KRPC? What are NNPC and KRPC's plans, in particular, to planning to initiate turnaround maintenance, and at what year? Because we have refineries that are not functioning. I think that question has been dealt with extensively. Or engineer, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, maybe it's likely he didn't get the picture, but through, like we said, the journey for the rehab, like I said, there's a difference between the turnaround maintenance and what we are doing now. The traditional turnaround maintenance time, which the whole world knows, is usually a statutory thing, which you do every 2 to 3 years, which you give yourself 45 days, don't open the system, clean the system, and get back. But because of the long neglect, we have gone beyond that level of turnaround. What we're talking about now is comprehensive rehabilitation, which will involve replacing very obsolete equipment that can bring the plant back to optimal performance. And that journey, as we speak, is ongoing. And I listed on my slides the steps that are going on both in Port Harcourt, in Warri, and Kaduna. So it's very clear that process is ongoing as we speak. And we have a deadline, we have a roadmap we are following religiously. Every month there is a stakeholder meeting that means to review where we are. Are there any slippages? How do we recover? All that is ongoing as we speak. But the top management is focused on this project as the number one project of NNPC as we speak. Thank you.
All good things, they say, come to an end sometime. Just one last question, and this is generally something for all of our speakers to ponder. In clear terms, in simple terms, what should we do with Nigeria's tomatoes refineries? Engineer Osarolube has told us what is currently going on, the upgrades that are being done to those refineries. Going forward, what should we do with them as we look into the future? So as I call on all our speakers to make their closing remarks, you may want to, share a few thoughts, some of your perspective in that regard. So I'll start the way we commenced the role of presentations today. I'll start with Mr. Krager. Give us your answer to that question and your closing remarks, and then we will go right on from there. Mr. Krager.
All right, Victor, thank you very much. And to everyone, thanks for staying with us this long. I think it's been a very rewarding session for all of us. My response is, I believe definitely the NNPC refineries should continue down this path and as quickly as possible commence the rehabilitation, because there's value on the table. We've talked about Africa's energy demands and the need for African energy security, and if the NNPC refineries can come back on stream as quickly as possible, it will be good. However, they need to ensure that they focus, as they're doing the rehabilitation, I think they should actually combine the rehabilitation with the upgrades to for cleaner fuel specs. Doing it in two steps, I don't think is the right way to go. And I believe the GMD mentioned at the ARA week that was actually something that was being considered. I believe that's the way they should definitely go. Straight to cleaner fuels, so that immediately they're up and running, they can actually sell their petroleum products across Africa. In summary, I will say again, we need an Africa energy security plan. We need to ensure that we are well positioned to take advantage of the increased demand that is projected, that is going to result from the increased population in Africa. As I had mentioned, the demand is there. We need to be careful about how we configure our refineries to produce high-value products that have lower sulfur fuels, but we also need to make a concerted effort in looking at our people. People will put in place the culture and in place the culture that is necessary to meet our strategic objectives. We need to focus on creating senior technical professionals across Africa, which is what the ARA is really pushing for. Captain A.H. had mentioned he had to go to the US and the like to get experts. We have them across Africa. Egypt has 8 refineries. They have done a tremendous amount of work and they're available. So we are putting together a program through our human capital work group that actually links people and puts in place curricula across the continent so that we put in place senior technical and commercial professionals to help us meet this challenge. We also have various other work groups which are available to help anyone who is looking at becoming a world's best refinery, up to and including the Sustainable Financing Work Group, which I believe is going to be fundamental in securing the financing required to upgrade our refineries and infrastructure to be profitable in meeting the demand going forward. Thank you very much for your time, and I wish everyone a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Engineer Obugwe, please.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Kraga. Yes, Engineer Obugwe.
The closing remarks are that we would definitely need to modernize our refineries. Modernization means putting in place the conversion facilities to upgrade to produce low sulfur fuels and also the petrochemical feedstock that are going to drive our industries. For this to happen, in the case of the NNPC refineries, they've made a lot of efforts within the past few years to get investors interested in providing financing so as to take products. This has not quite worked. I have a very simple suggestion. The simple suggestion is this. If you will divest some of the equity that is currently held by the government, that process of divesting the equity would generate funds that the new owners can then invest in upgrading the plant. Maybe that should be thought about straight away, because I tell you, going the two-step approach is going to face the challenges which have been experienced within the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years of attempting to do the same thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mr. Rachakonda from Dangote, Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead. Your closing remarks, sir.
Thanks, sir.
I'd like to call on Engineer Osaro Lugbe. Your closing remarks, and thank you for joining us even at short notice. Engineer Osaro Lugbe.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to begin by thanking the organizers for the opportunity. It's been a privilege being part of it, even though I joined late, like you said. And just to assure us that those who are going to work on the refineries are no mean people. We are really going for the best international EPC contractors who are very good in the business, who have been in the business for years. That's what they live on. So they're going to do a good job. And post the rehab, we are putting in place the O&M, the operations and maintenance contractors, consultants. So it won't be business as usual. they're going to run this thing in the most efficient manner, so that, because whoever is going to bring his money wants to be sure how he's going to recoup his investment. All this is on the table. That's why every detailed consideration is given to the processes involved. So I want to assure us that NNP, and if you have listened to our GMB in different fora, he says so much about it, all the plans to make sure that these fears are taken care of. At the end of the day, we do something that every Nigerian will be proud of, and indeed Africa. So I want to thank you and to assure you that we'll do the best in the interest of Nigeria and Africa at large. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer. Mr. Rajakonda and Captain Ihanacho are not yet online, but the time is fast spent. This is 12:10 p.m. So on their behalf, I would like to say thank you to everyone who has tuned in for today. We've heard from the experts, we've heard from the business people who are actually on ground trying to make it work. So I'd like to say thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to Anibo Kraga. Anibo Kraga, thank you very much. Thank you, Engineer Obuigwe. I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to Captain Ihan Acho, Mr. Rachakonda. Say thank you to everyone.
Thank you for having
backstage, all the people at the OTL Secretariat who I am sure put in time and effort and sweat to make this possible. I'm sure it's been a very fulfilling 2 hours. Thank you to everyone, and we must call this event to a close at this moment.